The stage pulled into Piñon, New Mexico territory, with wheels grinding against packed earth and Willa Davies gripping the worn leather seat so hard her knuckles had turned white as bone. She told herself she would not cry, not again, not after everything that had brought her to this dusty frontier town in the spring of 1878. Her trunk sat beside her, battered and scuffed from 3 previous journeys, 3 previous failures. 3 times she had been deemed unsuitable, unwanted, and unceremoniously returned like damaged goods to the matrimonial agency in Santa Fe. The driver, a grizzled man named Tom who had witnessed her previous humiliations, said nothing as he helped her down from the stage. His silence felt kinder than false encouragement. Willa straightened her traveling dress, brushed the red dust from her sleeves, and tried to summon whatever dignity remained within her 24-year-old heart. "You sure about this one, Miss Davies?" Tom finally asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "I have nowhere else to go," Willa said simply, because it was the truth. The matrimonial agency had made it clear this was her final chance. One more return, and they would terminate her contract entirely, leaving her stranded in a territory where single women without family or fortune rarely survived, let alone thrived. The first rejection still stung like a fresh wound. Robert Harrison, a banker in Las Cruces, had taken one look at her when she stepped off the train and declared her too plain for a man of his station. He wanted a beautiful ornament to complement his success, not a woman with honest brown eyes, freckles across her nose, and auburn hair that refused to hold a curl. The second rejection had cut deeper. Samuel Peterson, a shopkeeper in Silver City, seemed pleased enough at first. But 3 days before their scheduled wedding, his mother arrived from back east and deemed Willa completely inappropriate for her precious son. Too outspoken, too educated for her station, and worst of all, an orphan with no connections or dowry worth mentioning. The third rejection nearly broke her. Michael Thompson, a rancher near Mesilla, actually married her. For 6 weeks, Willa thought perhaps she had finally found a home, a place to belong. Then his former sweetheart returned to town, newly widowed and suddenly available, and Michael had the marriage quietly annulled. Willa never knew a heart could shatter so completely while still managing to beat. Now she stood in Piñon, population maybe 200 souls on a generous count, waiting to meet Peter Yates. The agency had been blunt in their final letter. "Mr. Yates is your last option. He is a simple cowboy, not a man of means or particular standing. He has requested a mail-order bride 4 times. The first 3 never arrived, claimed by other suitors before completing their journey. He specifically requested you after learning of your situation. We suggest you make this work, Miss Davies. There will not be a 5th opportunity." The agency office in Piñon was attached to the general store, a practical arrangement in a town too small for specialized buildings. Inside, a woman with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes looked up from her ledger. "You must be Willa Davies." "Yes, madam. I'm Margaret Sanders. I run the store and handle agency business on the side." She studied Willa with an expression that held neither pity nor judgment, only honest assessment. "Peter should be here soon. He rode out to his claim early this morning but promised to return by noon." Willa nodded, perching on the edge of a wooden chair near the pot-bellied stove. Despite the spring warmth outside, she felt cold. "What can you tell me about him?" Margaret set down her pen carefully. "Peter is a good man, honest, hardworking, kind to animals and children. He has a small ranch about 5 miles west of town, runs maybe 50 head of cattle and a few horses. Nothing grand, but he makes a decent living." "Why has he needed to request a bride 4 times?" Bad luck, mostly. Margaret's expression softened with sympathy. The first girl fell in love with a drummer selling dry goods and ran off with him in Albuquerque. The second decided ranch life was not for her and married a hotel owner in Santa Fe. The third took sick with influenza and never left Kansas City. Peter thought perhaps it was a sign he was meant to remain alone, but then he heard about you. Willa's throat tightened. He heard I had been returned 3 times and thought we might be equally desperate. I think he heard about a woman who kept trying despite heartbreak and recognized something of himself in that persistence. Margaret crossed to where Willa sat and touched her shoulder gently. Do not assume the worst before you even meet him, dear. Life out here is hard enough without borrowing trouble. The door swung open, letting in a shaft of bright sunlight and a man who had to duck slightly beneath the frame. Willa stood automatically, her heart hammering against her ribs. Peter Yates was not handsome in any conventional sense. His face was too weathered, too angular, marked by sun and wind and outdoor labor. He stood well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, with hands that looked like they had never known a moment of idleness. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly over his collar, and his jaw bore several days' worth of stubble. But his eyes, gray as storm clouds over the mountains, held a gentleness that caught Willa completely off guard. He removed his hat immediately, holding it against his chest with both hands. Miss Davies, I am Peter Yates. It is good to finally meet you. His voice was deep and quiet, roughened slightly as if he did not use it often. Willa found herself wanting to hear more of it. Mr. Yates, she managed, grateful her voice did not shake. An awkward silence descended. Peter shifted his weight from one boot to the other. Margaret cleared her throat diplomatically. Why do not you two take a walk? Willa has been traveling since dawn and could probably use some fresh air. Peter, show her the town. Piñon did not take long to tour. One main street, unpaved and dusty, lined with perhaps a dozen buildings. The general store, a saloon, a blacksmith's forge, a small church, a boarding house, and a handful of private residences. Beyond the town proper, scattered homesteads dotted the high desert landscape. And in the distance, the mountains rose like ancient sentinels against an impossibly blue sky. Peter walked beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, pointing out landmarks with minimal commentary. The creek that provided the town's water supply. The schoolhouse where Miss Emma Pritchard taught 15 students of varying ages. The cemetery on the hill where the town's founders rested beneath wooden crosses and piled stones. Finally, Willa could not bear the silence any longer. Why did you request me specifically, Mr. Yates? After 3 failed attempts, you could have simply abandoned the idea of marriage altogether. Peter stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the ground. May I be honest with you, Miss Davies? I would prefer it. I am tired of being alone. The words came slowly, as if he was pulling them from somewhere deep and private. I have a home, work I am proud of, land that is mine. But at the end of every day there is no one to share it with, no one to talk to except my horses and cattle. I tried 3 times to find a wife because I want a partner, someone to build a life with. When the agency told me about you, about a woman who had also faced disappointment but kept trying anyway, I thought maybe we understood each other. Willa felt something shift in her chest. You were not bothered that 3 men found me lacking. Were you bothered that 3 women never made it to me? That is different. Circumstance prevented them from arriving. I was actively rejected. Peter's gray eyes held her steadily. Robert Harrison is a pompous fool who measures worth in appearances. Samuel Peterson is a grown man who cannot stand up to his own mother. Michael Thompson broke vows he made before God. Their failures say nothing about you, Miss Davies, except that they were not smart enough to recognize quality when they saw it. Heat flooded Willa's cheeks. You do not know me well enough to make such judgments. Maybe not, Peter conceded. But I know a person is not rejected 3 times without being strong enough to survive it. I know you kept trying when quitting would have been easier. That tells me more about your character than anything those other men decided. Willa looked away, blinking rapidly against the sudden moisture in her eyes. What if I am too outspoken, too plain, too educated for my station? Can you read and write? The question surprised her. Yes, I attended school through the 8th grade before my parents died. Then maybe you could teach me. Peter's voice held no embarrassment, just simple honesty. I know my letters, but reading is slow for me, always has been. And as for being too outspoken, I would rather have a wife who talks to me than one who stays silent. This country is quiet enough without coming home to more silence. Something in Willa's chest, something that had been clenched tight for months, began to loosen. And being plain. Peter reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, and tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness for such large, work-roughened hands. I think you are beautiful, but more than that, I think beauty fades and character endures. I am looking for someone to weather the years beside me, Miss Davies. The only question is whether you are willing to take a chance on a simple cowboy who has been unlucky in love as many times as you have. Willa studied his face, searching for deception or false flattery and finding neither. I do not want to be returned again, Mr. Yates. I do not think I could survive it. Then we make an agreement right here. Peter's voice was firm, his gaze unwavering. No matter what difficulties we face them together. No returns, no running away, no giving up when things get hard. We give this an honest try, both of us. 4th time is a charm, right? Despite everything, despite all the heartbreak and disappointment, Willa felt a smile tug at her lips. You truly believe that? I have to, Peter said simply. Otherwise, what is the point of trying at all? Willa took a deep breath of the clear desert air, tasting dust and juniper and possibility. All right then. 4th time is a charm. Let us give this an honest try. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small white church at the edge of town. Margaret Sanders stood as witness alongside a rancher named Bill Coleman, who had ridden in from the neighboring spread. The circuit preacher was passing through Piñon on his monthly rounds, a fortunate bit of timing that Peter took as a good omen. Willa wore the same dress she had worn for her wedding to Michael Thompson, having no other suitable option. She had spent an hour that morning carefully removing the memories attached to the fabric, mentally recasting it as simply a dress, nothing more. Peter wore clean trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a string tie that looked stiff and uncomfortable around his neck. The ceremony was brief. The preacher, a man named Reverend Walsh with a booming voice better suited to a much larger congregation, rushed through the vows with practiced efficiency. He had 2 more towns to visit before Sunday and could not linger long in Piñon. When Peter said, "I do," his voice was steady and sure. When Willa echoed the words, she meant them with every fiber of her being. This was her last chance, her final opportunity to build the life she had dreamed of since girlhood. She would make it work or die trying. Peter kissed her after the Reverend pronounced them married, a chaste press of lips that lasted only a moment. His hands shook slightly where they held hers, and Willa realized he was just as nervous as she was. Somehow that made everything feel more manageable. After the ceremony, Margaret insisted on hosting a small celebration at her store. She had baked a cake, assembled sandwiches, and even procured a bottle of wine from somewhere. A dozen townspeople showed up, curious about the newest bride, offering congratulations and unsolicited advice in equal measure. "Do not let him track mud through the house," one weathered ranch wife advised. "Train them right from the start or you will be cleaning forever." "Keep him well fed," another suggested. "A hungry man is a difficult man." "Make sure you plant a garden soon as possible," a third contributed. "Store-bought vegetables cost a fortune and do not taste half as good." Peter stood slightly apart from the gathering, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. He caught Willa's eye across the room and offered a small, rueful smile that said plainer than words, "I am sorry for all this fuss." Willa smiled back, a genuine expression that felt foreign after so many months of forced politeness and swallowed disappointment. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Peter approached her quietly. "We should head to the ranch while there is still good light. It is about an hour's ride." Willa nodded, suddenly nervous in a way she had not been during the ceremony itself. The wedding was symbolic, official but abstract. Now came the reality of sharing a home, a life, with a man she had known for less than a week. Peter had brought a wagon into town, pulled by 2 sturdy bay horses. He loaded Willa's battered trunk into the back with an ease that spoke of considerable strength, then helped her onto the bench seat before climbing up beside her. The townspeople waved them off with shouts of congratulation and good-natured ribbing that made Peter's ears turn red. The road west out of Piñon was barely more than a track, winding through scrubland dotted with piñon pines, juniper, and sage. The air smelled clean and sharp, perfumed with growing things and sun-warmed earth. Overhead, hawks circled on thermal currents, and in the distance, a coyote called out a lonely song. "It is beautiful here," Willa said softly, meaning it. "Wait until you see the ranch at sunset," Peter replied. "The way the light hits the mountains turns everything gold and purple and red. It is the main reason I settled where I did. That and the good water from the creek." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses maintaining a steady pace, their hooves raising small puffs of dust from the dry ground. Willa found herself studying Peter's profile when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong nose, slightly crooked as if broken at some point, and lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind. His hands on the reins were confident, competent, the hands of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "Can I ask you something?" Willa ventured. "Of course." "Why ranching? What brought you out here?" Peter was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. "I grew up in Missouri, worked on my father's farm until I was 18. He was a hard man, believed children were just cheap labor and not much else. When I was old enough, I left. Worked cattle drives for a few years, saved my money, came west looking for land of my own. Found this piece of country in the fall of '75, filed my claim and started building." "Do you have any family back in Missouri?" "My father died 2 years ago. My mother passed when I was a boy. I have 2 brothers, but we do not keep in touch. They stayed on the farm, thought I was a fool for leaving." Peter glanced at her. "What about you? The agency said you were orphaned young." Willa nodded, old grief stirring in her chest. "Cholera took my parents when I was 13. I went to live with an aunt in St. Louis, but she was elderly and died when I was 19. I worked as a seamstress for a few years, but the pay was barely enough to cover rent on a room in a boarding house. When I saw the advertisement for the matrimonial agency, it seemed like the only way forward." "I am sorry," Peter said quietly, "about your parents, your aunt, all of it. Thank you." Willa folded her hands in her lap. "I try not to dwell on what is lost. It does not change anything." "No," Peter agreed, "but it still hurts." Something in his tone made Willa look at him more closely. "You understand loss. Everyone out here does, one way or another. This country takes as much as it gives. You learn to appreciate what you have while you have it. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, and Willa caught her breath. It was nothing grand, just a modest house built from pine logs and adobe, a barn, a few outbuildings and pole corrals where several horses stood with their heads over the rails, watching the approaching wagon with pricked ears. But the setting was spectacular. The house faced east, looking out over a broad valley with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising in the distance. A creek sparkled in the fading light, lined with cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out in pale green. "Peter," Willa breathed, "it is wonderful." He pulled the horses to a stop near the house, and Willa could see the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "You really think so? It is not much compared to what those other men could have offered you." "Those other men offered me nothing but disappointment," Willa said firmly. "This is a home. A real home." Peter helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close enough that Willa could see the darker gray flecks in his eyes, could smell leather and soap and honest sweat. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me show you inside." The house consisted of 3 rooms. A main living area with a stone fireplace and a kitchen area at one end, a bedroom, and a small room Peter used for storage. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly crafted by hand. Everything was clean, organized, showing the careful habits of a man who lived alone and took pride in his space. "I know it is not fancy," Peter began, but Willa cut him off. "It is perfect, truly." She turned slowly, taking in the details. Gingham curtains at the windows. A rocking chair near the fireplace. Books on a shelf, not many but carefully chosen. A rifle mounted over the door. Everything practical and purposeful. "You built all this yourself?" "The house and barn, yes. The corrals I had help with from Bill Coleman and a few other neighbors. We trade labor out here, everyone helping everyone else. It is the only way to survive." Willa moved to the window, looking out at the valley now bathed in the golden light Peter had promised. "I could be happy here," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Behind her, Peter's voice was quiet but intense. "I will do everything I can to make sure you are." That night, they were both awkward and careful with each other. Peter insisted Willa take the bedroom while he would sleep in the main room until she was comfortable with other arrangements. Willa wanted to protest, to say they were married and it was ridiculous for him to give up his own bed, but the kindness of the gesture silenced her objections. She lay awake for a long time, listening to unfamiliar sounds. The creak of the house settling, wind whispering through the eaves, horses moving in the corral, and from the other room, Peter's quiet breathing, the rustle of blankets as he shifted on what must be a desperately uncomfortable makeshift bed. Willa thought about the 3 men who had rejected her, each for different reasons but with the same result. She thought about Peter, who had been patient and kind from the moment she arrived, who looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth keeping. She thought about the agreement they had made in Piñon's dusty street. No returns, no running, facing difficulties together. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Willa fell asleep feeling something that might have been hope. The next weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Peter rose before dawn to tend the cattle and horses, returning for breakfast that Willa learned to prepare in the kitchen that was now hers. The coffee had to be strong enough to strip paint, the bacon crispy, the eggs cooked in the bacon grease. Peter ate with quiet appreciation, complimenting her cooking even when she knew the biscuits were too dry or the gravy too thick. After breakfast, Peter returned to his work, and Willa tackled the endless tasks of maintaining a household in the New Mexico territory. Laundry required hauling water from the creek, heating it over the fire, scrubbing clothes against a washboard until her knuckles were raw. Cooking meant planning carefully with limited supplies, making weekly trips into Piñon for staples from Margaret's store. Cleaning, mending, maintaining the garden plot Peter had helped her establish behind the house. The work was hard, harder than anything Willa had done in St. Louis, but it was also honest and meaningful. At the end of each day, she could see tangible results. Clean clothes hanging on the line. A tidy house. Bread rising under a cloth. Seedlings pushing up through dark soil, promising vegetables in the months to come. Peter, for his part, proved to be everything Margaret had promised and more. He worked from dawn to dusk and sometimes beyond, tending cattle, repairing fences, breaking horses, doing the 1,000 tasks required to keep a ranch functioning. But he always made time to talk to Willa, to ask about her day, to share stories about his own work. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away, Peter would pull out one of his books and ask Willa to help him with the difficult words. She discovered he knew more than he gave himself credit for, but reading was indeed slow and laborious for him. They started with simple passages, working their way through a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe that Peter said he had owned for years but never finished. "I like that he builds a life from nothing," Peter said one night, following the words with one calloused finger. "Make something useful out of what seems like disaster." Willa watched him concentrate, his brow furrowed with effort, and felt a wave of tenderness that surprised her with its intensity. "You have done the same thing. Built a life, a home, something substantial from nothing but determination and hard work." Peter looked up, catching her gaze. "So have you. 3 times you could have given up, but you kept trying. That takes courage." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken things. They had been married for nearly a month, but still slept in separate rooms, still maintained a careful physical distance even as their emotional connection deepened. Willa found herself noticing small things about Peter. The way his hair curled at the nape of his neck when it was damp from washing. The rare smile that transformed his weathered face. The gentleness with which he handled newborn calves and half-wild horses. "Peter," she said softly, "you do not have to keep sleeping in the main room. I know you must be uncomfortable on that makeshift bed." His gray eyes searched her face. "I did not want to presume. I know you have been hurt before. I wanted you to feel safe here, to have time to be certain about us." "I am certain." Willa surprised herself with the conviction in her voice, but it was true. Somewhere in the past weeks, between morning coffee and evening reading lessons, between shared meals and companionable silence, she had become certain. "I want this to be a real marriage, Peter, in every way." Peter set down the book carefully, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" "I need you to be sure, Willa." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep, quiet voice sent warmth flooding through her. "I am sure." He stood, crossing to where she sat in the rocking chair, and knelt beside her so they were at eye level. "I have never done this before," he admitted. "Been with anyone, I mean. I do not know exactly how to be what you need." Willa cupped his face with her hands, feeling the rasp of stubble against her palms. "Neither do I. We will figure it out together." When Peter kissed her, it was nothing like the brief, formal kiss after their wedding ceremony. This was deep and searching, a question and an answer all at once. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Willa felt safe in a way she had never experienced before. Safe and wanted and home. That night, they finally shared the bedroom, the bed themselves. It was awkward and tender and perfect in its imperfection. Peter was gentle, almost reverent, treating Willa like something precious. And Willa, for the first time in her life, felt truly seen, truly valued for who she was rather than who someone wanted her to be. Afterward, They lay tangled together under quilts Peter's long-dead mother had made, listening to the wind sing across the high desert. Peter traced idle patterns on Willa's shoulder, his voice rumbling through his chest. "I did not think this was possible," he said quietly. "Finding someone who fit so well, who made everything make sense." Willa pressed a kiss to the hollow of his throat. "Fourth time is a charm, remember." "You said it yourself." She felt more than heard his quiet laugh. "Best thing I ever said." The summer brought new challenges and new joys. The cattle thrived on good grass and plentiful water, growing fat and healthy. Peter worked long days during roundup, coming home exhausted and covered in dust, but always with a smile for Willa and appreciation for whatever meal she had managed to prepare. Willa's garden flourished beyond her expectations. Tomatoes ripened on the vine. Squash sprawled across carefully tended soil. Beans climbed poles Peter had erected for that exact purpose. She learned to preserve vegetables for winter, filling jars with pickles and relish and tomato sauce. The work made her hands rough and her back ache, but it also filled her with pride. Margaret Sanders became a regular visitor and a genuine friend. She would drive her wagon out from Piñon once every week or two, bringing supplies and news and welcome female companionship. The two women would sit on the porch Peter had built, shelling peas or snapping beans, talking about everything and nothing. "You look happy," Margaret observed one afternoon in late July, her experienced eyes missing nothing. "Really happy, not just making the best of things." Willa smiled, watching Peter work with a young horse in the corral, patient and steady as the animal learned to accept a saddle. "I am happy. More than I ever thought possible. Peter is different too," Margaret said. "He always was a good man, but he seemed lonely, like something essential was missing. Now he looks complete." "We complete each other," Willa said simply. It was true. Peter's quiet strength balanced her tendency toward worry. Her education and curiosity drew him out of his shell, encouraged him to think beyond just survival. They were better together than either had been alone. In August, Bill Coleman and his wife Rachel hosted a barn raising, and half the valley turned out to help. Willa met neighbors she had not known existed, families scattered across the vast landscape, all connected by the invisible bonds of frontier necessity. The women gathered in Rachel's kitchen, preparing food for the workers. The men swarmed over the barn frame like industrious ants, calling instructions and jokes to each other. Peter worked alongside the others, his shirt soaked with sweat. His face split in a rare grin as he hammered boards into place. Willa watched him from the kitchen window, feeling a surge of affection so strong it almost hurt. "You are lucky," Rachel Coleman said beside her, following Willa's gaze. "Peter is one of the good ones. Honest, hardworking, treats people right. You could have done much worse." "I did do worse," Willa admitted. 3 times before I got it right." Rachel, who knew the whole story through the efficient gossip network that connected frontier communities, squeezed Willa's hand. "Sometimes we have to go through the wrong things to appreciate the right ones. The important thing is you both kept trying." That night, after the barn was raised and the food consumed and the neighbors departed to their scattered homes, Peter and Willa rode back to their own ranch under a sky so thick with stars, it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Peter drove with one arm around Willa's shoulders, holding her close against him. "Did you have a good time?" he asked. "I did. It is nice being part of a community, feeling like we belong somewhere. We do belong. This is home." Willa leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "Yes, home." In September, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, a gradual awareness that her body was changing, preparing for something new. When she was finally certain, she waited for the right moment to tell Peter, wanting it to be special. She chose a Sunday afternoon when the work was caught up, and they had time to simply be together. Peter was sitting on the porch, oiling saddle leather, and Willa brought him fresh coffee and sat beside him. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Peter set down the oiled rag, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "We are going to have a baby. Sometime in the spring, I think." For a long moment, Peter simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile Willa had ever seen him wear. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, his voice rough with emotion. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Willa asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it. Peter pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "I thought I would spend my life alone, Willa. I made peace with it, or tried to. Then you came and everything changed, and now this. A family. A real family." Willa felt her own tears spill over. "I was so afraid to hope for this. Afraid something would go wrong, that I would lose it like I lost everything else." "Nothing is going to go wrong," Peter said fiercely. "I will not let it. We are going to have this baby, raise him or her right here on this ranch, build the life we both dreamed of." The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though winter brought its own challenges. Snow fell heavy in the mountains, and temperatures dropped until water froze solid in the buckets overnight. Peter worked tirelessly to keep the livestock fed and protected, often spending hours breaking ice on the creek so the cattle could drink. Willa, growing larger with the baby, did what she could to maintain the household. Margaret visited less frequently during the worst of the winter, but sent supplies with Peter when he made trips into town. The other ranch wives checked in regularly, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and the comfort of shared experience. "The first one is always scary," Rachel Coleman told her during a February visit, snow falling thick outside the windows. "But you are strong and you have Peter. That man would move mountains for you if he could." "I know," Willa said softly, watching Peter through the window as he carried hay to the horses. "I am very lucky." "You both are," Rachel corrected. "It is not just luck, though. You chose each other, keep choosing each other. That is what makes a marriage work out here." In late March, when the snow was melting and the first wildflowers were pushing up through wet ground, Willa's labor began. Peter rode through a cold rain to fetch Rachel, who had delivered half the babies in the valley and knew what to do. He returned to find Willa pacing the main room, one hand pressed to her lower back, her face drawn with pain. "Rachel is coming," he said, helping her to the bedroom. "She will be here soon." "Peter, I am frightened," Willa admitted, gripping his hand hard enough to hurt. "I know. But you are the strongest person I have ever met. If anyone can do this, it is you." Rachel arrived an hour later, bundled against the rain, carrying a bag full of supplies. She shooed Peter out of the bedroom with firm efficiency. "Go boil water, tear clean cloths into strips and stay out of the way. This is women's work." The labor was long and difficult. Night fell, and then dawn came again, gray and wet. Peter wore a path in the wooden floor with his pacing, flinching every time he heard Willa cry out. He had faced down charging bulls, broken wild horses, survived blizzards and droughts, but nothing had ever terrified him like the sounds coming from the bedroom. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, a new sound joined the storm. A baby's cry, thin and outraged and absolutely perfect. Rachel opened the bedroom door, her face exhausted but smiling. "You have a son, Peter, a healthy boy, and Willa is fine, just tired." Peter did not remember crossing the room, but suddenly he was at Willa's bedside looking down at the small, red-faced creature in her arms. His son. Their son. "He is perfect," Peter breathed. "You are perfect. I do not have words for what I am feeling right now." Willa smiled up at him, exhausted and radiant. "We did it. We made a family." Peter knelt beside the bed, one large hand gently touching the baby's impossibly tiny fingers. What should we name him? They had discussed names during the long winter months but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's scrunched face, Willa knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said, "after the stage driver who brought me to Piñon. He was kind to me when he did not have to be. Tom Davies Yates." Peter nodded, his voice thick. "Thomas Davies Yates, welcome to the world, son." The first weeks of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves. Willa had never been around babies much, and found herself relying heavily on Rachel's advice and her own instincts. Peter was terrified of the tiny creature at first, afraid his work-roughened hands would somehow damage the delicate baby. But Willa encouraged him, showed him how to hold Thomas, how to soothe him when he cried. "He is yours," she told Peter firmly. "He needs his father as much as he needs me. Do not be afraid of him." Gradually, Peter relaxed. He would hold Thomas in the evenings, rocking him while Willa prepared supper, singing soft songs in his deep voice. Willa loved watching them together, the huge man and the tiny baby, seeing Peter's weathered face soften with wonder and love. Margaret visited with gifts for the baby: carefully knitted blankets, tiny clothes, a wooden rattle Peter's father had sent from Missouri after receiving the news of his grandson's birth. The estrangement between Peter and his family was not complete, it seemed, though Peter said little about it. Spring turned to summer, and Thomas grew from a wrinkled newborn into a plump, curious baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. The ranch prospered. Peter hired a young cowboy named Jack Morrison to help with the work, freeing up time for Peter to spend with his family. The cattle herd grew, the horses multiplied, and Peter began talking about building an addition to the house. "We will need more room," he said one evening, watching Willa nurse Thomas in the rocking chair, "especially if we are blessed with more children." Willa smiled, tired but content. "I would like that. A house full of children, a ranch full of life, everything I never dared to dream of when I first arrived in Piñon." Peter crossed to her, kissing the top of her head. Fourth time was definitely a charm. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys, as all years do. Droughts tested their resilience, forcing them to move cattle to higher pastures and pray for rain. A hard winter in 1881 killed several head of stock, but they recovered. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child, full of questions and endless energy. When Thomas was 3, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, after Willa's mother and the friend who had been instrumental in bringing them together. 2 years after that came another son, James. The house Peter had expanded twice rang with children's voices, laughter and tears, and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Peter proved to be a wonderful father, patient and kind, teaching his children about the land and animals with the same gentle persistence he had shown Willa during their reading lessons. Those lessons continued too, and over the years, Peter's reading improved dramatically. He worked through every book in their small but growing library, taking pride in each one completed. Willa became an integral part of the community, helping neighbors through difficult births, teaching the occasional reading lesson to adults who had never learned, organizing social events that brought scattered families together. The mail-order bride who had been returned 3 times was now one of the most respected women in the valley. In 1885, when Thomas was 8, Sarah 5, and James 3, Margaret Sanders fell ill. The sickness came on quickly, a fever that would not break despite every remedy they tried. Willa sat beside her friend's bed for 3 days, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing. "You made it all possible," Willa said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "That day I arrived in Piñon, so broken and afraid, you were kind. You gave me hope when I had none left." Margaret's face was pale, her breathing labored, but she managed a smile. "You did the rest yourself, dear girl. You and Peter, you chose each other, built something beautiful. I am just glad I got to see it." Margaret died on a Sunday morning in June, with half the town gathered at her bedside. Her passing left a hole in the community and in Willa's heart. But it also reminded Willa how precious life was, how important it was to cherish every moment with the people you loved. Peter held her while she grieved, solid and steady as he had been from the beginning. "She loved you," he said simply. "And she was proud of the woman you became, the family we built. That is a good legacy to leave behind." They named their 4th child, born the following spring, Margaret Rachel, carrying on the names of 2 women who had profoundly shaped their lives. Meg, as they called her, was a tiny, fierce creature from the start, with her father's determination and her mother's stubborn refusal to quit. The ranch continued to grow. Peter bought more land, expanding their grazing territory. He built a reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled horseman, earning respect throughout the territory. When New Mexico finally achieved statehood in 1912, Peter was invited to participate in the celebration, though he declined, saying he had too much work and family to leave behind. Thomas grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, working alongside Peter with easy competence. Sarah showed an aptitude for teaching and eventually took over the school in Piñon when Miss Pritchard retired. James went east to study law, something that amazed and delighted Peter, who saw his son accomplish academic feats he had never dreamed possible. Meg married a neighboring rancher's son and settled just 10 miles away, close enough to visit regularly. Through it all, Peter and Willa remained each other's anchor, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still read together in the evenings when time allowed, though now they tackled novels and philosophy and poetry. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing, finding comfort in the sound of each other's voices. They still reached for each other in the night, finding solace and passion and home in each other's arms. One evening in 1915, with Thomas running the day-to-day operations of the ranch and grandchildren playing in the yard, Peter and Willa sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Peter's hair was silver now, his face deeply lined, but his gray eyes still held the same gentleness that had caught Willa's attention all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Peter asked suddenly. "Giving me a chance when you had every reason to refuse?" Willa looked at him in surprise. "Regret? Peter, you gave me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a life worth living. Why would I regret any of it?" "I was nothing special," Peter said quietly. "Just a cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams. Those other men could have given you more. They could have given me money or status or social standing," Willa agreed. "But you gave me something infinitely more valuable. You gave me partnership, respect, love that deepened with every passing year. You saw me, Peter, really saw me when others only saw a commodity to be evaluated and discarded. That is worth more than all the wealth in the world." Peter pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Fourth time was a charm. For both of us," Willa said softly. 3 failed attempts brought us both to exactly where we needed to be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn gold and crimson and purple, the same colors that had captivated them on that first evening decades ago. The ranch sprawled around them, built by their hands and hearts, populated by children and grandchildren who would carry on after them. "I love you," Peter said, simple words he had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their power. "I love you too," Willa replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you for not giving up, for requesting one more bride after 3 disappointments, for taking a chance on a woman who had been returned 3 times. Best decision I ever made," Peter said firmly. "I would do it again in a heartbeat." In 1918, the Spanish influenza swept through the Southwest, claiming lives indiscriminately. The family weathered the illness together, though it left them weakened and shaken. Peter, now in his late 60s, took longer to recover than the others. Willa nursed him through the worst of it, terrified of losing him, unable to imagine life without her partner of 40 years. "You are not leaving me," she told him fiercely, sponging his fevered brow. "We have grandchildren to watch grow up, great-grandchildren to meet." "You do not get to quit now, Peter Yates." Peter smiled weakly, his hand finding hers. "Would not dream of it. Made a promise, remember? No giving up when things get hard." He recovered, slowly but surely, and they continued on. The ranch passed primarily into Thomas's capable hands, though Peter still helped when he could, unable to completely give up the work he loved. Willa spent her days tending an ever-expanding garden, teaching grandchildren to read, preserving the family stories so they would not be lost to time. She wrote everything down in a series of journals, chronicling their life together from that first meeting in Margaret's store to the present day. She wanted future generations to know their story, to understand that love and persistence could overcome almost any obstacle. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, the entire family gathered at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren filled the expanded house and spilled out into the yard. A photographer from Albuquerque came to take pictures, capturing 3 generations standing together, living proof of what Peter and Willa had built. That evening, after the celebration wound down and the house finally quieted, Peter and Willa walked out to the creek, following a path they had walked countless times over the decades. The cottonwoods were huge now, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The water still sang the same song it had sung when they first arrived. 50 years, Willa marveled, lacing her fingers through Peter's. "It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I remember the day you arrived like it was yesterday," Peter said. "You looked so scared but trying so hard to be brave. I knew right then I would do whatever it took to make you feel safe, to give you a reason to stay. You succeeded beyond measure." Willa leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I found more than safety with you, Peter. I found home." They stood together beside the creek as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, 2 people who had taken broken pieces and created something whole, something beautiful, something lasting. Peter passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1930, at the age of 76. Willa woke to find him still and cold beside her, his weathered face peaceful, one hand still reaching for her even in death. The grief was crushing, absolute, the loss of the man who had been her partner for 52 years, leaving a hole nothing could fill. But even in her sorrow, Willa found comfort in what they had built together. The ranch, thriving under Thomas's stewardship. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying pieces of Peter forward into the future. The love story that had started with 2 people unlucky in love, and ended with a legacy that would endure for generations. Willa lived another 8 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She spent her final years writing, gardening, spoiling great-grandchildren, and telling stories about the quiet cowboy who had taken a chance on a mail-order bride returned 3 times. She died in her sleep in 1938 at the age of 84 in the bedroom of the house Peter had built, surrounded by family. Her last words, spoken to a great-granddaughter who leaned close to hear, were simple and profound. "Fourth time was a charm. Never forget that. Never give up on love, no matter how many times it seems impossible. Keep trying. Someone is out there, waiting for you to find them, just like Peter was waiting for me." They buried her beside Peter on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the vast New Mexico sky they had both loved. The entire valley turned out for the funeral, paying respects to a woman who had come west as a desperate bride and become the heart of a community. Thomas, now in his 60s and graying at the temples, stood beside his siblings and children and grandchildren, looking out over the ranch his parents had carved from raw land and stubborn determination. They were lucky to find each other, someone said beside him. Thomas shook his head, thinking of the stories his mother had told him, the journals she had left behind, the legacy of love and persistence that defined his parents' lives. "It was not luck," he said firmly. "They were both broken and determined and brave enough to try one more time. Fourth time was a charm because they chose to make it a charm, because they refused to give up on love or each other or the life they dreamed of building. That is not luck, that is courage." The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and fresh-turned earth. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied and life continued on the ranch that love had built. And if you listened very carefully on quiet evenings, when the sun painted the mountains gold and crimson and purple, you could almost hear 2 voices, deep and soft, reading together beside a crackling fire, finding in each other the home they had both been searching for all along. Fourth time had indeed been a charm, creating a love story that transcended time, hardship, and even death itself, proving that sometimes the best things in life come to those who refuse to stop trying, who keep faith even when all seems lost, who believe that somewhere, someone is waiting to be found. The ranch still stands today, run by Peter and Willa's descendants, a living testament to 2 people who turned disappointment into destiny, who built something lasting from nothing but hope and hard work, and a love that refused to be denied. Their story is told and retold at family gatherings, written in fading journals, whispered by the wind across the high desert they both called home. And every spring, when wildflowers bloom across the valley and the creek runs high with snowmelt, those same descendants walk up the hill to where Peter and Willa rest side by side, and they remember. They remember that love is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth believing in even when the odds seem impossible. They remember that fourth time truly can be a charm if you are brave enough to try.